27th, Ordinary Sunday 30, we're getting ourselves ready for. We've got Mark 10:46 and following, the passage of Jesus' encounter with Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. Welcome, Damon. Welcome, Mark. Incorrectly, if anybody's reading, it says Emma, but he's married to Emma, so that's close enough. And welcome, Deborah. This is a well-known passage, and we will begin with a little bit of background, I think, from you, Damon.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Well, the story, of course, is the healing of blind Bartimaeus. And to understand this passage, I think we have to go back a few chapters before the request of James and John for greatness, before the rich man's question about eternal life, before Peter's declaration of Jesus as the Messiah, to another story of a blind man who's cured. That's back in chapter 8, verse 22 onwards. And the two stories bookend a significant section in Mark's Gospel about discipleship and what it means to follow Jesus as the Messiah. But there are a number of differences between these two stories. In the first one, the blind man is brought to Jesus and his sight is only gradually restored, and it takes a whole lot of saliva to make that happen. And then when he can see, he's sent home again. And in this second story, the story we're focusing on today, it happens just outside of Jerusalem. The blind man is named, it's Bartimaeus. He's sitting by the roadside and he takes the initiative in this story. Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And he persists in his call for Jesus to respond to him in spite of the resistance, the opposition of those around him. And so Jesus calls him, and the blind man leaps up and he throws off his cloak and he comes to Jesus. And then that's that very insightful and probing question of Jesus, what do you want me to do for you? And the response of Bartimaeus is to let me see. He wants to see. And then, having his sight restored, no saliva this time, he follows Jesus on the way. And I think Mark, the writer of this gospel, was wanting to make a contrast between the blind man in the story who sees and the disciples who repeatedly miss the point 3 times. Jesus foretells his death and resurrection in this section, and 3 times the disciples don't get it. Peter rebukes him. The disciples argue about who is the greatest, and James and John want to sit by his side in glory. And 2 just further brief points. The first of all, the title that Bartimaeus uses of Jesus, son of David. This is the only time in this gospel where that title appears. And the second thing is that question that Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you, has echoes not only of James and John in the preceding story, but also of Herod and Herodias's daughter way back in chapter 6, when Herod asks Herodias's daughter, or says to her at least, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. So it sets the context, hopefully, for what others will have to say.
Thank you. That's a feast of riches. And let's move straight on and start looking at some challenges. I'm going to start with you, Mark, who probably bring, and we've had conversations about this personally, some particular insights to this passage. But fire away, Mark, this challenging passage.
Well, I think the challenging thing is, first of all, of some other people's attitudes, or either the crowd. Actually, in this case, yes, it is the crowd, because it's the people who sternly ordered blind Bartimaeus to shush up. And I got the sense, if they were utterly, their attitude to people who were, in inverted commas, different, if you like, it was blind Bartimaeus who exposed their attitude, and just the courage of blind Bartimaeus. So in terms of that, do we give them the dignity that they need, in contrast of Jesus with the whole thing of, what do you want me to do for you? As opposed to some people would have been, while I know what's best for you. The people who sometimes, occasionally, would grab me by the elbow when they were wanting to guide me somewhere. And I felt like saying to them, why do you want me to lead you then if you're taking me by the elbow? And so that exposes stereotypes, and there's some of those are still going on. There's one time I went for a walk, and there was a motorcyclist, nothing against motorcyclists, but this particular one yelled out and said, "You blind beggar!" And I wasn't actually betting for begging anything. Both Jesus and blind Bartimaeus exposes the culture of the time and still exposes the culture of the time today. We've come a long way, but we have a lot to go.
Okay, thank you for that valuable perspective. And let's talk to you, Deborah, and see what you find challenging.
I think there's a challenge here for everyone when we say, Jesus, this is what I want you to do for me, and it doesn't happen. It's the challenge of unanswered prayer. In a sense, Bartimaeus was blessed, but there are plenty of people who ask for things and it doesn't happen. So that's a challenge.
Absolutely huge challenge. Thank you. And Damon, back to you for where you find challenge.
Yeah, well, I have my sight, but I suppose for me is, do I truly want to see is the challenge. Do I truly want to see? And I'm just reminded of some words by the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard, where he writes, the matter is quite simple. The Bible is very easy to understand, but we Christians are a bunch of scheming swindlers. We pretend to be unable to understand it because we know very well that the minute we understand, we are obliged to act accordingly. Take any words in the New Testament and forget everything except pledging yourself to act accordingly. My God, you will say, if I do that, my whole life will be ruined. How would I ever get on in the world? And so that challenge is, do I truly want to see?
Always edifying, Kierkegaard, isn't he? Thank you for that. Let's, having been left with that, lots of challenge, but Deborah, where do you begin to unpack good news?
I think for me, part of the good news is that Jesus does ask Bartimaeus what he wants, instead of just simply assuming, because he could have wanted something else altogether. And it's the good news of human agency that we get to say. There's a lovely comment about, and it might be Augustine, but I've never found where it is, about God saying, without God we cannot, and without us God will not. The fact that we get a say in what happens. We have the right to ask.
And that kind of underscores what Mark opened with. So that'd be interesting to see where we see applications at the end of that. But before we go that far, let's ask Damon, where you unpack some good news.
Well, I think the real possibility of transformation comes through this gospel. The truth is that we are loved into being, and in recent Sundays we've heard the story of the rich man who Jesus looked at and loved. Jesus saw into the core of his being, and yet the rich man was unable to follow. He couldn't because of his possessions. And we have Bartimaeus here, who Jesus also saw and no doubt loved, and just his response to follow Jesus on the way. And in between those two people, we have the disciples, who are probably much like you and me, seeing and not seeing, understanding but not fully grasping what this is all about, and wanting to remain in control of our lives, of our narrative, but still there on the way, and all the way to the cross and beyond. And those disciples who continued to be loved into being, as you and I are in all our fallibility.
It's that vast array of love, if I can put it that way, that Jesus exhibits across these chapters. And yes, deeply good news. So I'm going to throw back to you, in fact, Damon, and ask you, so what?
Yeah, I walked into the church recently, and as I opened the back door, I was going to lock the church for the day. There was this young man sitting there with a Bible in his hands, and we were both shocked by seeing each other. And we got into a bit of a conversation, a 16-year-old boy, the same age as my youngest child. And I asked him, what brought him that day into the church, and had he been into a church before? And he said, no, he hadn't. But his grandmother had died in the last 12 months, and it had made him think about life and death. And she had given him a Bible at some stage, and so he decided to start reading it. And he had begun reading with Matthew and Mark and Luke, as many people do. And I just love the fact that he was a young person who had that hunger and that yearning to understand. And so it comes back to me, is to say, do I continue? Do I still have that that hunger to really seek to go deeper into this journey of faith that beyond today's reading takes us into Jerusalem, into the very heart of what our faith is all about?
Really does. Thank you for that. Mark, for you, so what?
Well, my so what is probably the fact that we are encouraged to be courageous and to acknowledge honestly that that there are times that we need mercy, times that we need help. And I would finally say that the people who say, I don't need any help, or the people who go to the self-help brigade, are the people who are going to get the greatest crisis, and that things like certitudes and all that kind of stuff would be the greatest disability of all.
Now, I'm going to pause there, because I think I've cheated you, Mark, because my eyes skipped a column. I don't think I ever asked you for any good news, did I?
Well, my good news is also the dignity that Jesus offers, and that don't be afraid to speak out and be honest. I mean, blind Bartimaeus was far more honest with him and aware with himself than some of the journeys of the disciples. They're still at grade 4, grade 5. It's almost like that blind Bartimaeus has skipped to grade 7. He had the insight of what was going on. And Jesus cares for the fringes of society.
Thank you for that. So, Deborah, I'll give you a final word, please. Yeah, so what? Where you stand, so what?
I think for me, part of the so what is that we are who we are because of our relationships. Jesus is addressed here as Son of David. I mean, that's who he whakapapas back to, and even further back than that. Bartimaeus, we're told Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, but of course the very name Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus, except that's an Aramaic son of and a Greek Timaeus. So there's a backstory there I would like to know. But we are who we are. We didn't get here on our own. We got here by our relationships, by those who've gone before us, by those we walk alongside. And I think that's hugely important.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. It's a vivid passage, and you've all brought some wonderful insights, which are going to help us very much as we, in turn, try to break it open this Sunday. Thanks for joining me.